Alright guys, this is the first lecture of the year for AP World History. This is dealing with Chapter 1, which is the emergence of humans onto the earth and the transition to agriculture and complex societies. In AP, we need to focus on the big picture. There's far too many details for us to possibly remember them all, but if you can remember the big picture of a time period, you can kind of understand it better, and it'll really help you for the exam at the end of the year. Early human beings were the most successful because we had our intelligence, our communication skills that developed because of our brains gave us some serious advantages over all other hominids and animals that were on the earth at the time. A big thing to know about humans, a difference between humans and other animals is that other animals adapt to the environment or they die. Whereas human beings, over the course of hundreds of thousands of years, have been able to actually change the environment rather than merely adapt to it. And this has put us as the top of the animal kingdom, if you will. In this, roughly 12,000 years ago, we had a transition from our caveman days, which is the hunting and gathering. It's the nomadic lifestyle of following the game. We transitioned from that into agriculture, and it changed human history forever. All of the perks of our modern lives come from this agricultural revolution. Without it, none of them would have been possible. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail about them. Our first cities, so far that we've been able to trace back, roughly about 6,000 years ago, human beings started creating cities. Early complex societies. Agriculture was immensely important to those societies, and without the agriculture they could not have actually existed as a complex society. These complex societies arose roughly from 3500 BCE to 500 BCE, so you're looking at almost 4,000 years ago to even as near back as 2,500 years ago, if you will. These societies tended to arise independently. There is a theory that all human beings began in Africa and spread out in migrational patterns, but you're talking about hundreds of thousands of years ago. By the time the agricultural revolution comes along, agriculture is going to actually develop independently in China, Iraq, Egypt, Mesoamerica, South America, and they will actually develop independently of each other. All these complex societies developed in river valleys because fresh water is immensely important. Without it, your crops die. Without it, you die. So you could not have a complex society where there was not ample sources of water. Nile River, Tigris Euphrates, Yellow River in China, source of water, very important. In the early days, wealth could not be passed down to heirs because when you're following the herd, there is no time to accumulate wealth. After the agricultural revolution, however, people are able to accumulate wealth and pass it down to their heirs, which will lead to social classes. In the caveman days, there were no social classes. You were all hunters, you were all gatherers. Prehistoric man, meaning before written history, that's what prehistory is. Prehistoric people were more egalitarian, meaning that they were, there wasn't as big of a distinction between men and women. They all had the same role: give food, provide for their offspring. Also, when these cities developed later on after the agricultural revolution, they developed on the backs of the lower classes. The lower classes made the elite people wealthy. Record keeping initially was for trading transactions between complex societies. You want to make sure that you remember how much corn you're getting and how much, say, seashells you're trading to the other people. Eventually, though, you'll start seeing things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, myth stories, creation stories, the Greek gods, that kind of stuff. So obviously writing has come a long ways from merely being used for record keeping. A complex society is a little difference between them and other villages of the time was that villages were local, whereas complex societies extended their values over a large area. And that's basically your overview of this chapter. And give me just a second while I plug in my computer. Note to self, always make sure you got battery life. Okay. Alright, so back to this. Let's get into the chapter itself. And we start off with Lucy. Well, who is Lucy? She is the oldest known relative of human being that we've ever found. Roughly 3.5 million years old. She's not a human, but she is considered to be an ancestor of humans. 3.5 feet tall, so not very tall. 25 to 35 years of age when she died. She was named after the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. All of our knowledge from prehistory comes from artifacts, bones that are dug up like Lucy, artifacts that are found like pottery and stuff like that. There were no written records in prehistory. So understand that sometimes our interpretations of history will change as new artifacts are found. History is not static. It doesn't necessarily stay the same. It is a fluid thing that does change over time when we get new information. All right, evolution of Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens, that's us, human beings. There were other hominids, which are upright, walking, humanistic type creatures. These include Australopithecus, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and of course Homo sapiens and Neanderthal man. All of those are hominids. All of them existed before human beings. The latest of them was Neanderthals. Neanderthals roughly on the earth 140,000 years before human beings, but there was about a 40,000 year overlap where Neanderthals and human beings actually existed on the earth at the same time. Now, human beings were much more sophisticated than Neanderthals. Neanderthals actually had a larger brain size, but their brain wasn't as developed. They did not have the communication abilities that humans had. Humans could coordinate ambushes and attacks. They were more inventive, more innovative, and this gave them extreme advantages over Neanderthal man. Our DNA tests have shown that there was remarkably little interbreeding between Neanderthal man and human beings. For the most part, it appears that human beings saw Neanderthals as something as not human, which they weren't. Human intelligence allowed us to migrate into colder regions because we were able to invent clothing, if you will. I mean, we found artifacts of old needles made of bone that they would place leather sinew from animals, and they would, again, just a way of showing how humans affected the environment rather than being affected by the environment. We could move up north where it was colder, migrate because of these inventions. Paleolithic society. Paleolithic means Old Stone Age. 98% of human history was in the Paleolithic era, before the agricultural revolution. In that time period, we are following the game and we are hunting berries. Let's see. No chance for accumulation of wealth. We talked about that already. There were times when certain individuals, even though it was a more egalitarian society for the caveman, most people were on the same level, if you will. We're hunters, we're cooking the food, we're trying to survive day to day. There were still people that, because of their size or strength or their force of personality, that had maybe an elite status inside of these small nomadic groups. And the Paleolithic groups, you're talking 35 to 50 people. You can't support a large population in that time period because, to feed that many people is a huge burden when you're trying to hunt. If you don't believe me, don't go to the supermarket and just rely on hunting to give you your food. This leads us to one of the most important events in human history, and that is the Neolithic Revolution. Neolithic means New Stone Age. It's a term you need to know. We're still using stone tools, but the stone tools are more developed. It's in this time period that the agricultural revolution occurs. And when that happens, when people can all of a sudden, their food source is right there, and it's always right there, people are starting abandoning the nomadic lifestyle. They begin settling down. And when you settle down, some people begin specializing in growing food, that becomes farmers. Other people can just merely trade with the farmers for the food. So they have time to sit and think and specialize. Specialization is something from a complex society. Pottery is the oldest known craft. Human beings began making vases and jars to hold water, to hold food, to store goods in. Followed closely by metallurgy. Human beings are going to transition from a Stone Age to a Bronze Age. Bronze was the first metal that humans worked with. It occurs naturally in an environment, and it's easy to work with to create better tools. The textile industry quickly followed metallurgy. We were making clothes, and textile industry obviously is still a big deal today. Let's see here. Most likely the agricultural revolution actually began by women, and we'll talk about that a little bit more detail in class. Just know that the agricultural revolution, a huge event, and it occurred independently throughout the world. China, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, South America, it happened independently that human beings discovered this awesome power of growing crops and domesticating animals. Instead of following the herds, have the herds right there at home. Goats, sheep, cows, of course, all used for food sources. Agriculture led to huge population explosions. Human beings basically bred out their competition. Neanderthal man was not nearly as successful as a breeder as human beings because they weren't able to get the food source that humans were able to get. This agricultural revolution led to urban culture. You had the creation of these large cities, and in these large cities you had social classes emerge. You had the leaders, the people who called the shots. You had priest class that developed. You had merchant class that developed. You had craftsmen, artisans. You, of course, had the peasants and slaves that were really the backbone of all these early complex societies. The earliest known complex societies that we found up to this point are Mesopotamian ones in modern-day Iraq and Iran, Sumer, Uruk, many city-states that we'll talk about in much greater detail in Chapter 2. But this is your broad overview of the chapter. This is the story of mankind from chasing around animals with spears and bows and arrows to finding out that when seeds go in the ground and they get water and sunshine, they grow a crop that's reliable. And when you're not spending all of your time hunting and trying to survive day to day, it gives the wonderful human mind time to dream, time to imagine, time to think, and this will lead to where we are today in year 2014. Okay, thank you.